move unfortunately back into some of the harder and more tricky topics. I think part of part of why I want to talk about some of the violent tactics used by the apartheid regime against the people struggling for liberation outside of the system is because it kind of, I think my generation has lost the sense of just how evil the state was in every way. We kind of understand their legislative evil, but we don't understand that evil ran through everything they did, from the way that they acted in the political way they acted to the way that they were willing to quell dissent and to use violence against people like you. And so I think, to not spend too much time on it, but the part that struck me when reading your book was something that blew my mind, was when you talked about Operation Coast and the development and use of chemical weapons by the apartheid state. And so, when did the use of chemical weapons become a part of the apartheid state's arsenal, and what and could you maybe outline some examples of their use against some of your comrades, if you don't mind?
No, it's not only your generation, Gabriel. I think by and large, the narrative of South Africa's transition from apartheid to democracy has been shrouded in a narrative that has not allowed us to get to grips with the nature of the apartheid state and the problems that we had to face to bring about this democracy. You are right. There was a project called Project Coast that the apartheid regime authorized. But before that, let me say this, that as far back as it is now established, that as far back as 1983, or am I wrong? I think it is earlier. I think it's in the 70s. The apartheid state decided to engage in experimentation and development of nuclear weapons. Now, and those nuclear weapons were being designed to be used in order to smash the liberation struggle. Who were you going to use nuclear weapons against? In the 80s, of course, the evidence that has emerged at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is that Project Coast, a project authorizing the medical section of the South African Defence Force to engage in the development and use of chemical and biological weapons, was taken. That decision was taken by the regime at the topmost level. And in devising that, they authorized a doctor, a brilliant man, Dr. Wouter Besson, who is still around as a cardiac surgeon, to engage, to head this project. The evidence has come through that in Project Coast, it is through this development of chemical and biological weapons that they supplied the material to inject, for example, SWAPO detainees so that they became immobilized, and put them on a plane and took them over the Atlantic Ocean and dumped them. The records show that more than 200 such cadres of SWAPO were disposed of. In this process, they developed, and the evidence opposed in particular cases, to put poison into the clothing so that people who wore that clothing would be poisoned. And it was confined, not confined to just those of us who were in South Africa. Connie Braam, who was the secretary, a Dutch citizen, secretary of the anti-apartheid movement, was poisoned in that way. She survives till today. Klaas de Jonge, who escaped when he was detained, a Dutch citizen, was also poisoned in the same way, and he lost one eye in the process, but has survived. The Reverend Frank Chikane of South Africa was twice poisoned in that way, and he was lucky he survived because the clothing that he wore was on a trip to the United States where he was found to be ill, and treatment there saved his life. In South Africa, Siphiwe Mtimkhulu is a classic case. Young youth leader, student leader, arrested, detained, and before they released him, they poisoned him. And when he came out of detention, his hair was falling out, and the comrades then took him to doctors, and the examination showed that he'd been poisoned with thallium. He then sued the police for poisoning him. But the next thing, he and another comrade, Topsy, disappeared. And the regime put out the story that they found the car at the border of Lesotho, and they believed that Siphiwe had fled into exile, and the ANC should account for his disappearance. In the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it emerged that they had actually kidnapped the two of them, brutally tortured them, killed them, burnt their bodies, deliberately took the car and put it near the border of Lesotho so that it would look like they had gone to join the exile movement. Those are cases that have come out. The full story of Operation Coast has never been told. But there is enough evidence to show what was being done by the apartheid regime. And we know that this development of nuclear weapons was taking place against the anti-proliferation decision of the international community. The development of chemical and biological weapons, a violation of international norms of struggle. And against this background, let me say that the ANC, under the leadership of Tambo, had signed the Geneva Protocol that we would follow the rules dictated by the international community in the conduct of our struggle. So I can say much about this, but I think that the story of our struggle, what we attempt to do, must be related to another book that has come out by Andre Odendahl on Dear Comrade President. It tells the story of how the ANC from 1986 developed positions in exile that were culminated in the Harare Declaration. Those were the issues in the current situation where the narrative of our change has been told really through the eyes of the South African ex-intelligence system, of the British conservatives like Robert Harvey and the American conservatives. And it's only now that through documentary evidence, the green shoots of a new narrative are coming through. And so I have willingly participated in your podcast because I believe that it would help to reinstate the story, not with a view to take revenge. Let us be clear. We had to examine this problem deeply in the ANC, even when Mandela had been released and negotiations were now about to happen. We began to look at this problem, look at the experience of the world, look at the experience of the Nuremberg trials, look at the truth commissions in Latin American countries, and come to the realization that in our country, the way forward would be on the basis of creating a non-racial, non-sexist society. And to do that, when Mandela came into power as president of the country, the program that we had was premised on three fundamental legs. The first was the reconstruction of our socio-economic system so that everybody would benefit from it and it would serve the interests of all and not one racial group. The second was to reconcile our people from the bitter struggles imposed by colonialism and apartheid. And that meant reconciling between the oppressed and the oppressor, because we believe that the liberation struggle was intended to liberate not just the oppressed, but to liberate the oppressor also. And the third was to build a nation of black and white, of people of different religions and different cultures and languages, all of whom live within the borders of this country, into one nation. Those three were interrelated and they premised our approach on the basis of reconciliation, not revenge. Unfortunately, the good efforts that we've made and the good efforts that have been done by, for example, Archbishop Tutu under the Truth and Reconciliation Commission have remained incomplete tasks, and the agenda of reconstructing our socio-economy, the agenda of reconciling our people, and the agenda of building a nation remain an ongoing project, incomplete, and at times attended to in a very tardy way. But our future depends on that.
And I think part of the reason why we might have have let slip our drive towards the three crucial points that you outlined, I think they are um, those are things that all South Africans nowadays can accept and can believe that those would be good. But part of the reason is I think we've lost the sense of the importance of the transition to democracy. And so thank you for being so willing to outline some of the horror that was faced by you and your comrades, because it it's driving home to me just how much of a miracle it was that not only did you manage to survive all of the attempts that were being made to destroy the liberation movement, but you took that hatred and that oppression and that anger, and you turned it and you used it to motivate you to become better and to do better. And for that, I can only be, as a young South African, I can only be thankful.